This past Friday evening, an annual ritual of sorts took place. During the broadcast of the NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt, they closed the show that evening with their end-of-year mashup of graduation images from colleges and universities all across the country, along with some of the pithy or poignant or humorous one-liners from the commencement speakers who had sent this year's graduating class off into the big wide world. Now, whether you call that particular event graduation or commencement, it marks the point of transition as one chapter of life comes to an end and another one begins. It doesn't make any difference whether you're graduating from kindergarten or graduate school. The question always seems to remain the same. What do you want to be when you grow up? It's the kind of question that just seems built into the dialogue whenever we talk to someone who's closed the developmental chapter of one phase of life while awaiting whatever it might be that's coming their way next on the road. What do you want to be when you grow up? It's a question which has always fascinated me at one level, I guess, because usually we are looking for a very different answer than the one which the question implies. For many of us, I suppose, both as the questioner or as the responder, the correct answer has something to do with whatever occupation lies in store for us somewhere in the future. I want to be a doctor. I want to be an astronaut. I want to be a teacher or a firefighter or a lawyer or a physical therapist, or, God forbid, I want to be a priest. Now, all of those are perfectly good responses. But at some level, they really answer a very different question than the one that was asked. They answer the question, what kind of job do you want to have when you grow up? A question which is really secondary, I think, to a much more fundamental and foundational life question. What do you want to be? Regardless of whatever you do, whatever kind of work it is that allows you to meet the basic necessities of life, a question we all need to ask ourselves on a regular basis, I think, is, what do you want to be when you grow up? Some years ago now, the U.S. Army figured out a significant difference between those two questions. What do you want to be, and what do you want to do? And so they built their whole advertising campaign around it. In fact, I talked a couple of Sundays ago about the one that came after this campaign. This was the campaign which was built around a simple statement. Be all that you can be in the Army. Now, it said nothing about what you were going to do. Whether you were going to be an infantryman or operate a computer or drive a tank or sit in an office somewhere filling out paperwork 8 hours a day as a member of the U.S. Army. But it said everything about living into the potential, growing into the person you were truly meant to be. And at least to me, it also implied a second message as well. That wherever you find yourself in life, in terms of being all that you can be, you're not quite there yet. This morning's gospel lesson, telling the story of Jesus raising to life again the unnamed son of the unnamed widow from the village of Nain, as well as that parallel story from the Old Testament when the prophet Elijah does much the same thing with the widow's son at Zarephath. That story is not so much for me a story about some kind of miraculous magic trick that Jesus is able to pull off to delight and amaze the crowds gathered for the young man's funeral. Rather, it is a much more basic and fundamental statement about God's intent for all creation. An intent best summed up in Jesus' words in the 10th chapter of John's Gospel, when he proclaims, "I came that you might have life, and have it abundantly." Many of you probably know the old African-American spiritual that tells us, "I'm just a poor wayfaring stranger, traveling through this world of woe. But there's no sickness, toil, or danger in that bright world to which I go." Well, those words may express a sentiment held by many of us. But I got to tell you, I don't see much evidence of Jesus encouraging people to just plod their way through this life in the hope that there's something better waiting for them on the other side. It's not as though in Jesus' mind this world is merely a dress rehearsal for the real thing. That real thing which awaits us in the great by and by. In fact, I think just the opposite seems to be the case. Time and time again, Jesus' message is about life. Life lived to its fullest. Life in the here, life in the now. It's about pushing through, breaking down, obliterating the roadblock which death sets in our pathway. So that life, real life, life lived to its fullest, can be found and celebrated and lived in its place. Jesus' question to each of us, across the miles and across the ages, is not whether there is life after death, but rather whether there is life after birth. Maybe some of you saw it. Back in 1999, there was a movie that came out that was called The Sixth Sense. It told the story of a young boy named Cole, who had a particularly rare gift, if you could call it a gift. You see, Cole could see ghosts. He could see people who had died. In one interchange between the boy and his therapist, Cole describes this strange phenomenon. "I see dead people," Cole says. "Dead people like in graves, in coffins?" his therapist asks. "Walking around like regular people," Cole responds. "They don't see each other. They only see what they want to see. They don't know they're dead." "How often do you see them?" the therapist asks. "All the time," Cole says. "They're everywhere." Well, I've got a sort of confession to make to all of you this morning. I see dead people too. No, not the kind of dead people that Cole saw in The Sixth Sense. But I see people walking around every day who carry in their heads and who carry in their hearts and who carry in their bodies the cold reality of death. And the saddest part of it is that so many of those folks have confused the death they carry with life. And so have come to believe that the way that it is just the way that it is supposed to be. People carry with them the death of a hope, the death of a dream, the death of a relationship, the death of a vision, the death of their pride or their integrity or their dignity or their respect. And sometimes that death is so real, you can see it. You can feel it. You can smell it when that person walks in the room. It's a kind of death which paralyzes us. It stunts our development as people of God, and it causes us to build walls between ourselves and others, walls between ourselves and the world, and it prevents us, in the words of that old army slogan, of being all that we can be. And it is in the midst of that kind of death that Jesus comes to us. And he lays his hand on our funeral bier. And the words of Jesus to that young man so long ago become the words of Jesus to us as he leans over our death-filled bodies and he utters those words, "I say to you, rise." What do you want to be when you grow up? It's not just a question to be posed of someone clutching a newly earned diploma. It's a question which each one of us is asked by God with the invitation to push through whatever kind of death it is which is confining us to the world as it is, with the promise of new life awaiting us in the world as it might be. The Irish poet and philosopher John O'Donoghue once wrote these words. He said, "In the Western tradition, we are taught many things about the nature of sin, but we were never told that one of the greatest sins is the unlived life." So live life. Live life as fully as God has intended you to live it. Naming that death within yourself which is holding you back and offering it to God who holds out his life-giving hand with those words of promise. I say to you,